Hello everyone. Today I am going to be briefly discussing The Dirty Dozen, which I put into the classic category for various reasons. It is a rather older film. It's a film that I think executes itself fairly well and sort of provides an interesting take into sort of the World War II era, and I think the way it portrays the characters as well as sort of the story is really well done. For the most part too, I also think the title in itself is fairly catchy, The Dirty Dozen, and you'll kind of see why it's called The Dirty Dozen, and I'll kind of sort of explain that. But basically, I think it's sort of similar to, how you have the good, the bad, and the ugly, where the title just kind of sticks out to you. And I think The Dirty Dozen's title does stick out to people, even though they may not necessarily remember what it was about. So it does have that kind of interesting title with it. But basically, what you kind of need to know going into The Dirty Dozen is that it's about this major named John Reisman, and he's played by Lee Marvin. And basically, he is in charge of training these 12 convicts who committed various crimes to be sent on sort of a suicidal mission before D-Day, so that they can ultimately execute major Nazi officials in the World War II era. So basically, it's trying to set itself up as I think more as a fictional setup, in that this didn't seem like it actually happened, although it is, I believe, based upon a book that sort of had maybe similar elements in it. But for the most part, everything is pretty much fictionalized. And at the same time, even though it's fictionalized, it kind of takes this sort of interesting approach. I would say that I'm not sure if Inglourious Basterds was inspired by this particular film, but I kind of see the similarities with being sent out on a secret sort of mission, and having these characters sort of interact, and having to sort of cover themselves up along the way. So again, you kind of do see these little similarities, I think, and I find that interesting, and I think in a way you can kind of tell that this movie was trying to be one of those films that people could take from and use. And I'm not sure which one came out first, if The Great Escape came out first or The Dirty Dozen, but I was noticing fairly similar concepts, especially with the idea of people banding together and trying to work sort of as a unit, similar to how Lee Marvin's character is trying to get all of these convicts sort of together and to work together. But the goal, essentially, and the whole mission is completely different. So you do have a different plot setup, but the way it executes itself, I think, shows that it's worthy of this kind of recognition as being a classic, because the way Lee Marvin, as well as all of the other characters, sort of portray their roles and have these kinds of character moments where you kind of see how they disagree at some points, and how they come to sort of consensus at others. So really, this film, I think, sort of takes it upon itself to be sort of a unified / leadership stylized film, in that it's showing how some people who have maybe done some immoral things can still be used as sort of a tool to accomplish something that can be used for good. And I find that to be rather interesting in how the film does this. It really, I think, does a good job of sort of conveying that idea of how you can see the humanistic side of the convicts, and that not all of them are completely evil or maniacal. They just made some horrible decisions in their lives, and they sort of are trying to redeem themselves by having this kind of mission set upon them, even though maybe initially it wasn't something that maybe they would want. So again, it is kind of trying to show you those different things, and I think overall the film does a good job executing those aspects of people who may have done something wrong but can somehow sort of redeem themselves by developing a sense of commitment to a mission that's ultimately done out of a force of good. So that's really overall what the film, I think, is trying to convey for the most part. Also, the acting, I think, suits itself really well. Lee Marvin is really good too. He's a fairly enjoyable character and a leader. You do get the sense that he was sort of born to play this role, and I think he executes it fairly well. All the other people in the cast seem to do a fairly good job and are committed to trying to sort of stick out in certain ways, and I'm sure there'll be probably characters that stick out a little bit more than others for some people, I'm sure. But for the most part, I think it really does try to focus in on Lee Marvin and how he has this really has this pressure on him to really try to pull something through with these people, and you'll kind of see at what ends up happening with that mission that he's been instructed to do. So for the most part, I really think that's ultimately all I can say about the film without giving anything away. But really the basic premise and all you need to know is that Lee Marvin's the leader, who's trying to motivate these 12 convicts, the Dirty Dozen, to go on a mission that will ultimately create a positive outcome and ultimately kill top Nazi officials that are inhabiting, I believe it is French. I believe they end up, the whole mission is based upon attacking this one particular chateau where these Nazis will be. And again, I think you can kind of see the similarities again to Inglourious Basterds, where they're going actually into a theater where there's all these Nazis, and the whole mission of Brad Pitt and his gang is to sort of get rid of them. But I think personally the Dirty Dozen does a way better job of sort of establishing the characters personally. I feel like that it does a better job of sort of conveying the whole mission itself. I think there's a lot more interesting dynamics going on as opposed to Inglourious Basterds, but I can kind of see how other films sort of took inspiration from this one. At least that's how I personally felt. I think there's some people who could counter-argue this and say, well, I don't think really that's what Inglourious Basterds was doing, and maybe provide evidence for that. But when I was watching the film, I couldn't help but notice it. But if anybody wants to refute that, I'm totally open to whatever you have to say. But for the most part, I think The Dirty Dozen serves itself as being a good World War II era film. It does a good job of kind of giving us characters, giving us this kind of sense of leadership and providing us a way to gain a sense of understanding of what these convicts ultimately have to face, and sort of get a little bit, I guess, maybe redemption from what they were accused of, or I guess repented maybe might be the better word. And whereas The Great Escape was more intended to be out of freedom and to strive for the outside world, and this one is sort of done as a form of, it's like a quasi-punishment, but again, it's sort of a way of trying to get these people who are criminals to kind of redeem themselves and have one last hurrah, because again, they do sort of explain into the film that this is sort of a suicidal mission, in that the likelihood of people coming out alive is fairly slim, but you will end up seeing who lives, who dies, and all of that good stuff. So really, I think it serves itself well as a film that executes these different ideas together, and comes off as fairly entertaining and engaging, because there's a focus and there's a mission, and it's clear and it's concise. So it's I think that's why it makes it a classic, in that it has that simplistic classic charm, but it does it with a lot of substance. So I think ultimately that's all I can say about this film, but if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But until tomorrow, everybody, bye-bye.